So I am a lifelong early educator, and I wrote this book, Illuminating Care, over many, many years of thinking about care. Um, I actually had a long career working with twos and threes and 4-year olds in nursery school and therapeutic preschools. And there was a short period of my life when I worked in the public school, and I went to work with kindergarten, first and second grade. Of course, that was still early childhood, but I felt the difference. I felt the difference in the age range and also in the culture of the school. You know, in the public school, we feel like we're real teachers. We have desks and hallways and chalkboards and assemblies. There's a different culture, and it was great, but I really did miss the young children. And as soon as I could, I went back to work in early childhood. And that contrast of leaving the big school and going back to work with 2 and 3-year olds really gave me a lens, a new perspective on care as a central part of our pedagogy when we work with young children. I was helping babies, 2-year olds and 3-year olds, separate from their parents on the playground with my new job after having left the public school. And like I said, that contrast as I stood there holding a toddler on my hip and another child leaning against my leg, this physical maintenance of care, I thought to myself, would my colleagues in the public school, would they see me as a teacher now? What is it I'm doing now, holding these children? And I started to think about all the caring rituals, the wiping the noses, the preparing snack, helping children regulate and rest their bodies, rubbing backs, putting on Band-Aids, zipping up coats, all this physical labor that we engage in when we're working with the youngest, most vulnerable children. And in my mind, I realized that it is through care that we develop relationships with children. It is through care that we develop trust. But for some reason, it's really hard to talk about care. Why is care is so close to us? Why couldn't I see it? Why couldn't I name it? Why couldn't I call care educational? And that began my journey writing this book. And also, I'm going to share my screen here. Here it is. It began my quest to understand care and to study care. Let's see if I can advance. There we go. I thought I would start the session today with a story. And this is a story from my book, and it's called Julia and Cat Play. In my book, I call care a science. And I say that once you start looking at what you do through the lens of care, you see care everywhere. And what I started to notice was the themes of care in children's play. And this is one of the stories that I captured. The story of Julia as a cat. Julia was a sweet 4-year-old in my classroom with a debilitating and progressive illness. She talked to her teachers in a quiet voice and rarely engaged other children. She could communicate in sentences, but she used a quiet voice because her low muscle tone affected her breath support. And she was frequently absent due to medical appointments. This caused her to lose out on the opportunities for sustained play and robust physical life in the early childhood setting. Although our preschool team was attentive and sensitive to her situation, we weren't fully aware of the burden her illness had placed on her until she invented a story one day at the writing center. The children were making little books with blank sheets of paper and practicing using the stapler for bindings, while the teacher acted as scribes and recorded the messages and the stories that the children told. Julia found a sticker of a cat and a dog, and she placed them inside her homemade book. Nancy, the speech therapist, said, "Can you tell me your story?" Julia said, "The dog is sad. The cat is sad." Nancy wrote down her words. "I wonder why." Julia, "Because they're sick." Nancy, I wonder what we should do about that." Julia, "They don't want to be sick anymore." Nancy read Julia's story aloud to me, and Julia nodded with a sense of sureness and pride in hearing her words. The dog is sad, the cat is sad because they're sick. They don't want to be sick anymore. This was a profound moment for our teaching team because we've not known the level of awareness Julie had about her disability or the feelings of sadness she was experiencing. At the same time, we understood the power of this experience in helping her express her feelings. Because we had created a ritual of sharing our stories at group time, Julia expressed her interest to read her story to the class. A wonderful aspect of this opportunity for children is that they invariably remember exactly what they dictated as we read the story. I asked Julia if she wanted to act out her story. Julia said she wanted to be the cat. She came to the center of the circle and lay down on the floor. I read Julia's story and asked if she wanted the children to do anything to help her feel better. She said, "They can pet me." We watched with goosebumps as the children crowded around Julie and she accepted their gentle pats on her body, curled up in a cat position. From that day forth, Julia, who had never joined the other children in play, became a cat every day. And the children held her and petted her and made her beds for her daily cat care play. I often think of Julia as an example of the beautiful and complex world that exists in an early childhood community of caring for children. As we care for the child makes her inner life known to us. We can see it and accept it. And if we make room for it in our classroom and we make room for it in ourselves, children give us the opportunity to know them. Julia gave us an opportunity to know her and gave everyone in our class a chance to be a part of her caring story. We all have a care story. We probably all have many care stories. Care is so much around us. Care is the reason we have all survived. But like I said, sometimes it's hard to name it and to think about the power of care. When I started thinking about care as a pedagogy, I found Nell Noddings, who is a care philosopher, writer, educator, a mother of 10. And she said that most people would agree that the world would be a better place if we all cared more for one another. But despite that initial agreement, we find it's hard to say exactly what we mean by caring. And Nell said this in the midst of, her awareness of the political climate, that often people think of care as a soft skill. Often people think of care as women's work. Often people think that care doesn't belong in education or that it is subordinate to education. And Nell is one of those early feminist scholars, care ethicists, who tried to articulate the strength of care. She was writing about care from an educational philosophy standpoint, and she was really arguing that we needed to consider the principles of care in our teaching of elementary and high school children, even in college students. So I found it fascinating that in my field, in the field of early education, although care is so obvious, it's such a part of our day-to-day interactions with children, it's still difficult to talk about it. Nell was writing about care, philosophy, and care ethics around the time that Carol Gilligan was also talking about care and feminist ethics from a psychologist standpoint, right? She had been working with Erickson and Kohlberg and pointing out that there was this different voice, this voice that didn't always fit into the educational goals and the talk about morality and justice and fairness and competition. And it was the voice of the woman who had traditionally been in the home, who had traditionally been caring for others, caring for the children or the elderly or the disabled. This idea of a care ethic And both Nell and Carol wanted to make sure that people understood they weren't saying that because care has been traditionally in the realm of women, that it is women's work, that actually care is what makes us human. Men have been deprived of the joy of caring, and that the new frontier for equity is to acknowledge that care is what makes us human, not what makes us women or men, but the care is what makes us human. So how do we define care? In my book, I like to define it in 3 ways. And first of all, I really want people to think about care as an action, because I think it's so easy to skip over this part. And what I mean is those things I talked about before, the pedagogy of care that our days are wrapped up in when we work with young children. It is helping zip the coat and wash the hands and prepare the snack. It is this physical labor. And I ask people to appreciate their hands, to look at their hands, just as the child is learning with their whole body. So is teaching a bodily encounter. Our bodies are important. Our hands are important. I ask people to, feel their backbone, and take a big breath right now. Feel your strength, feel your backbone, see your hands, be in this physical body. And think about the ways that we can counteract this sort of false dichotomy that is in our face in educational communities, which says that the mind is more important than the body. Because those of us who work with young children know that the mind and body are connected. So care is an action. And then care is an attitude. So how do we show what we care about? How do we approach care? How do we approach the child? And when I think about the attitude of care, I think about sometimes I think of it like an art, like the invisible art of care. Your tone of voice, your presence, your listening attitude, your gaze. Like I said, care is an action, it's in our body. But what do your hands say? How do your hands show that you care? What about your pace? Are you moving quickly or slowly? What about your facial expression? Again, your presence. A big part of caring is being present, right? And then lastly, care is an ethic. And that takes us back to Nell Noddings, who said that, we don't want to understand care just because we want to take good care of little kids. Of course, we want to do that well, but it's also because care is an ethic by which we live our lives. The ethic of care, at the root of the ethic is this understanding of our interdependence, this understanding of our relationship. That independence is really a myth. The vulnerable at the beginning of life who need care, and perhaps the vulnerable at the end of life, elders, perhaps people with disability, all these people who at some time in their life need more or less care are whole, capable people. Neediness does not make us weak. Neediness, dependency, caring for each other is actually our human strength. So we're trying to flip this paradigm, that care is our strong backbone, care is our human strength. And once we recognize that, how does it change our priorities as educators? I don't know why I'm having, okay, there it is. Nell Noddings, as an educational philosopher, she broke down her philosophy of care ethics for educators. She's written so many books. I won't try to go too far into it, but she broke it down in these 4 categories: modeling, how do we treat one another, and what do children learn by the way we treat one another? Dialogue, how is education like a conversation? Just like care is like a conversation, you want to be reciprocal, you want to be improvisational, you want to give and receive. How is care and education like a dialogue, a conversation? And practice. How do children have opportunities to practice care when they grow up in a caring environment where they see adults caring for others, caring for each other, caring for them? Then what opportunities do children have to practice care in real meaningful ways? I mean, she talks about how does our educational environment turn away from the institution and turn towards domesticity? How could our educational environments be opportunities for children to practice care, caring for plants, caring for one another, caring for animals? And then confirmation, she says that she describes confirmation as the act of encouraging the best in others and trusting the individual direction. So by confirmation, she just talks about how each person has an internal drive. It's that, these things like dialogue and confirmation, she's really building on the work of progressive educators like John Dewey, saying that, education is life. It is not separate than life, and that each child has their own direction. And I apply these in my book to care, that care can't be forced. The child knows their body. We respect the boundary between the adult and the child around caring rituals, around dressing and feeding and eating and sleeping. So Nail's educational philosophy can really be applied to all settings, to people who are teaching college. And in my book, I've applied it to those of us who work with babies and toddlers and young children and kindergartners, where we still see the vulnerability of the child and recognize it as an invitation for an intellectual exchange. I like to think of the care concepts that I designed or describe in my book as lamps, because care is, I like to shine a light on these concepts of care to help us reflect upon our practice when we're working with young children. And I think the lamps of care can guide us, but they're not right or wrong. It's not a how-to guide, because care is not perfect. Care, like any good educational practice, is something we grapple with. And it's something that happens in the moment. Like I said before, a dialogue, an exchange with an individual. It's that moment of meeting the other. So these are the lamps of care that are in my book. Care is education, care is a right, care is a partnership, care is bodily, care is an art and a science, and care is what makes us human. And today we're just going to really focus on this notion of care is education, this first lamp. Childcare is education. The pedagogy of care dissolves the false dichotomy that there is a split between early education and care. In the past, caring may have been viewed as a minimum standard, as something that just keeps the child safe or warm, something that anyone could do. And in the emerging future, caring is viewed as an intentional teaching practice that connects us to one another, recognizes the specialized knowledge about children, that requires a specialized knowledge about children, about learning, growth, and human development. I want to dispel this myth that there is a difference between caring for kids and educating for kids. There's lots of different ways we can talk about what we do, and we can talk about caring for them and educating them separately, but I really like to bring care and education together. I really want to talk about the inseparability of education and care for the young child who is on this incredible journey, moving from complete vulnerability, the baby, to an independent human. That's a big path. And it involves the physical pathways of learning to eat, right? Going from breast to bottle to spoon, to developing a relationship with food, the pathways of toileting, diapers, to learning to sit on the on the toilet, to get into underpants. These physical pathways are enormous pathways to brain development, to the child's self-concept. So care is critical. There's a myth that childcare and early childhood childcare and early education are two separate things. Childcare centers only provide that custodial care, and preschools get children ready for kindergarten, right? Get children ready for the big school. But the truth is, early education and care are inseparable, and the highest quality programs for young children unite education and care. There's a myth that care involves the basic bodily functions, while education involves the mind. But the truth is that this is a false dualism, and especially so for our youngest children. If I had to put them on a hierarchy, I would say that, learning to be comfortable in your body, to have confidence in relationships with your food, in controlling your bowels, in learning to regulate yourself and sleep, these care pathways are more critical than learning to write your name or tie your shoe. I mean, learning to write your name or read a book, right? Those things will come. Those things will come if we have this foundational relationship of care with a trusting adult. Just like other things that we as educators are trying to advocate for. I think about like play, right? We are trying to advocate for play. And there have been periods of time when play has been more accepted than others, or when standards have really driven down and have caused, these developmentally inappropriate kindergartens, first grades, preschools. We've had to advocate for play and choice and the things that we know build strong thinkers and strong citizens. And I think about care the same way. When we're advocating for play, people have said to us, don't talk about play, talk about experiential learning, talk about hands-on education, talk about the curriculum block, choices, autonomy, use this other words to help the stakeholders and the administrators understand that play is education. And I think what we've done as we've advocated for child-centered programs is we'd said, okay, yeah, we can talk the talk, but we're not going to stop saying play, because play respects the child. Play respects the culture of the child, because we dream of a day when play can be appreciated for the sake of play. And I feel that same way about care. They will say, oh, call it social emotional development, or, call it relationship-based education. Yes, that's true. Care is those things. But unless we really name care and talk about changing diapers and talk about washing hands and talk about the multiple physical labor task that's involved in growing a human, then it still remains invisible and isn't seen. So there is this work that we all have to do in dispelling these false dualisms between the mind, the body, the emotion, the logic, the work, play, thinking and feeling, education and care. I often ask people too, when they're thinking that care is education, that care is not subordinate to education, that care is foundational learning. Like, why do we think we have to rush through snack time to get to circle time, that circle time or the story or whatever activity we have planned is more important than what is right before us? How can slowing down the rituals, the activities of daily life bring more value to the child? Care is foundational learning. And I think about the hierarchy again, like how can we break out of these hierarchies? Well, we use Maslow a lot to support us as caregivers, right? We say that the physiological needs are at the base. That's what we build the rest of the house on, right? Without the physiological needs, without feeding and caring for and dressing and keeping the child safe and warm, he will not be able to be a thinker and a self-actualized person. But I also think that there's this weird thing that happens when we put things on hierarchy, and it causes care or the physiological needs to be at the bottom. I know for us, we understand it's the foundation, but I just challenge people to think in new ways of how we can just, really, I think during COVID, I just wanted to flip the hierarchy completely over and say, care is at the top, the physiological needs are at the top, and all trickles down to help us become fully self-actualized people. We're having conversations about not enough toilet paper, or who's going to take care of the kids because all the schools are closed, and so the care, the essential workers, the teachers became seen. So I wanted to flip that hierarchy. I also say, like, can we break through some of these categories? Because when you're feeding a baby, when you're nursing a baby, do you really think of that as the foundational skill? Is it actually the same thing as love to the baby? Isn't food love and belonging to all of us, right? If we are having a nice meal with our colleagues, isn't that the same thing as esteem, as comfort, as belief in yourself, as self-actualization? And I would also argue, the baby, can the baby be self-actualized? Can the toddler be self-actualized? Can each stage of life be complete and whole? And these hierarchies cause us to think that we are always on our way, right? When really the baby can be whole, the 4-year-old can be whole, the elder can be whole. So the categories and the hierarchies, they can serve us sometimes, but I'd like us to try to find new ways to talk about care. And I'd like us, like Nell Nodding said, she said, we don't want to just promote care because we want to take good care of little kids, but because care is an ethic by which we can live our lives, no matter what kind of work we're doing. And she said, but the reason it's so powerful for us who are at the beginning, working with young children, the reason it's so powerful for us is because it's the original care. That relationship at the beginning of life is the original care. It's the nucleus of care. It is the strength of our survival. Humans, mammals come into the world completely dependent upon one another. And we are built for care. So instead of looking away from the baby, instead of always focusing on getting ready for kindergarten and first grade and second grade and college and career, what would happen if we looked back to the baby and remembered where we come from, remember our strength as human? I think to incorporate, right, the best of early childhood education at any time that we're educating humans is only going to strengthen our practice. And the other thing about remembering the original care, remembering the nucleus of care, is allowing ourselves to feel our own humanness as we care for others. If we are in a rut of caring on autopilot, as we all will be when we care, because it's a lot of work and we don't do anything perfect, how can we find a way to be reflective and remind ourselves that care is education, that we do not need to treat it like drudgery, to tap into our own nervous system, our need to be soothed, to slow down, our need for eye contact and connection, all these human needs that are amplified in the baby and in care are also still our needs. And once we slow down the pace and find time to interact with one another, especially with the children in our care, we can receive. Care can be reciprocal. We can find a way to engage in care that doesn't feel like sacrifice, if we can elevate care as a pedagogy and practice in our mind and in our practice. When we're examining care as an educational philosophy, as a pedagogy, I ask people to think about some of the goals and some of the rituals and some of the routines that we build our schools around, that we build our habitats for children around. Are they really meaningful goals that build citizens and thinkers? Or are they part of this structure of schoolification, right? Is it part of that factory model? Um, we need to learn how to be in groups together, of course, and how to socialize. But when I think about prioritizing the goals of early education, I fall heavily on the side of child development, and that is supported by a care ethic. Play and care and movement and stories and songs and conversations, developing the child habitat, where some of the things that we practice with kids that become rote, that become institutional feeling and turn away from home and domesticity are the things like standing in line and job charts and calendar time and raising hands and behavior management charts. So care challenges us to think, what is the true goal and purpose of education? Care brings us really into sort of that radical dialogue of evaluating where we're going in this field. Imagine the difference between an early childhood teacher who treats, who treats care as drudgery and one that treats care as an intellectual exchange and honors care as a practice. Imagine the difference in a child's day from that experience. I think about like the split between education and care all the way through my own children's experience, right? When they were in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, all the way up. And I know the difference it made when we had those teachers that cared. The teachers in middle school that helped my sons find their hoodies, you know, or help them open their lockers. That again, we come back to this labor, this recognition of our humanness, this labor of the body, this connection over the mundane, right? These daily tasks. There is magic in the mundane because that is how we connect with one another. I think about the bus drivers and the cafeteria ladies again, that split, you know, those are the moments my kids remember, right? Those were the whole body physical encounters where they felt themselves as autonomous citizens. But yet we separate the day between education and care when really integrating it is acknowledging the wholeness of the learner. So is caring natural? Early childhood teachers may have inclinations towards caring, but it's not accurate to believe that caring is natural. Caring can be learned. Caring can be analyzed. It can be improved. And I like this way of thinking that, yes, sometimes caring feels natural, right? And some of us are more intuitive and caring than others. But caring can be learned. And when we consider caring as part of our pedagogy, part of our educational practice, then we can have conversations with one another. We can grapple with care. We can talk about the meaning of human growth, empathy, attentiveness, and trust. Caring with this attitude makes it an intellectual, honorable exchange. One of the stories I tell in my book is about a couple teachers who were taking all the children outside. This was a group of 4-year-olds, 4 and 5-year-olds in the spring, and they'd been a muddy day and they all got their shoes wet. So they had changed shoes and they were going out for the second time. And one of the teachers went out with the first group and one was left behind with one little boy who wouldn't put his shoes on. And they were having this argument, you know, like she was saying, I know you can do it. Put your shoes on. And he was saying, I can't do it. And he was flopping around on the floor. And I was close by and I witnessed another teacher come in and say, you know, can I help? And she sat down on the floor next to the little boy and she said, what's going on here? It looks like you need to get your shoes on. Do you need some help? And he nodded his head. And she said, wow, where should I put this shoe? Should I put it on my ear? You know, she kind of joked with him, and then he kind of pulled him out of his rut a little bit. And then she said, let me see. I know how to put on your shoes. How about if I put on this one for you and you get the other one ready? And so she quickly, like, stuck his foot in the shoe and tied the shoe, and he kind of perked himself up and got the other shoe and ran outside to play. And then I witnessed the conversation between these two teachers, where the one teacher said to the other teacher, I'm sorry for like stepping in like that, but I know that sometimes when you get in a power struggle with a kid, it just helps to have a breath of fresh air. And the other teacher said, yeah, I really think it's important for him to put his shoes on. He's independent. He can do it, and I don't know why he was flailing around like this, and I'm not going to treat him like a baby. And then the other teacher said, well, yeah, I hear you. You're right. It is important. We do want children to do things on their own, and we do encourage independence. Um, but I wonder why. I wonder why he couldn't put his shoes on today, or he wouldn't put his shoes on today. And then I heard the two educators having this dialogue about, maybe he was missing his mom, maybe he was tired, or have you noticed how he's always the last one in the cubby room? It seems like he gets really overwhelmed and overstimulated. It seems like he might have some motor planning issues. There are many reasons why children invite us into this exchange of care. And the teacher said, I, as an educator, decided to meet him halfway, because I know that when kids get in a power struggle over their own body, there's no winning. We can't tell a kid what to eat, how much to eat, when to eliminate, when to fall asleep. Their bodily functions are their own. And that's why bodily functions often become power struggles, because kids know, this is me, this is my body, and I'm going to hold on to it. So this led to such a wonderful, rich dialogue and conversation between these two educators about an issue as simple as putting shoes on. And it helped us in our school evaluate our value on care and our value on independence. It led us to think about how we all like to be cared for, even when we can do things by ourselves, right? It feels good to have your partner put a shawl around your shoulders when you're cold. You can do it by yourself. Or to have someone, a friend, bring you a hot cup of tea or a cup of coffee. We have this way of caring for each other all through life. And again, it brings us back to this myth of independence. There are reasons throughout our life when we need each other. And we're reminded that even when we are thinking we are the most independent person, we've reached this pinnacle of adulthood and we don't need anyone, we really do, right? Because someone's growing our food, and someone is driving the food to the grocery store, and someone is building the roads, and there is this infrastructure that holds our world together. We never exist alone. And as natural and as built for care that we are, when we have these conversations about care, and we begin to think of care as a practice, something we can grow, something we can learn, it becomes kind of exciting to me that it's not just you're caring or not, but it can become a way that we learn to be together as humans. And then in my work, I ask teachers to reflect upon themselves as teachers, just like I did when I was back at my job as a young teacher, leaving the public school and going back to work with the young children. Do you only see yourself as a teacher when you're reading a book, when you're pointing to the letters of the alphabet, when you're doing a science experiment with the children? Those things are wonderful and meaningful and purposeful. But do you also see yourself as a teacher when you're caring, when you're sitting on the floor, when you're zipping up a coat? When we practice care as a relational ethic, we recognize the inherent worthiness of the person. We treat care as a way of teaching trust, respect, and the value of human relationships. Appreciating care for the sake of care is about understanding that caring for the child's body is the same as caring for the child's mind and spirit. So we want to start by appreciating care for the sake of care, appreciating children for the sake of who they are, being children, appreciating childhood, appreciating play. But if we have to talk more about how care is education, if we have to build rationale, we can. Just if we involve children in cooking and using tools. Most parents and educators feel really great when they see the child holding the scissors, or holding a pencil. But there are so many wonderful tools in the kitchen that pull the child's body and mind together, that integrate this whole body learning. Using both sides of the body, chopping the apple, preparing the food, the snack, setting the snack table, the one-to-one correspondence, putting the trays around, matching the trays to the cups, using both sides of your body to peel the cucumber, talking about where food comes from and where it goes, being a citizen who helps in real ways, loading the dishwasher, doing the dishes, being a contributor. Um, like I said, where does food come from? How does it grow? How do we change it? How is that preparation of food and involvement around meals, a math and a science activity? How do, throughout the day, our children have time to practice care? Not only does the teacher support the child in putting on her sock, but her peer can help her put on her sock. They can take turns going around the room and waking up the children quietly and rubbing their backs and rolling up their mats. Sometimes people assume that care is a philosophy that does everything for the child. But I argue in my book that it's this wonderful opportunity for the child to be a full citizen and fully participating in the care of themselves, the care of their community, the care of one another. Here is an example of, integrating the life of the parent in our school, that as early childhood teachers, one little girl liked her transitional object from her bedroom, her little lion. The other girl wanted to hold a picture of her parents. So again, when we lean into the care ethic, we think about domesticity. What role do we have in connecting the child to her family? What role do we have going back to attachment, right? When we are caring for other children, we talk about the family. We have relationships with the parents. We are sort of this triangle of love, the child, the parent, the teacher, that supports healthy bonds and attachment and helps the child form those mental images in her mind so that she holds on to her parent even when they are apart. So many ways that we can think about dressing and undressing and getting to the table and sitting in the chair, getting on the toilet as a math and science, activity in planning and sequencing and developing those motor skills and those proprioceptive balance. And again, this community of caring for one another, the social emotional foundation. And again, what opportunities do the children have to care for creatures that are smaller than them in our culture of caring that we're creating? When we start to look at education through the lens of care, are we caring for the animals, the plants, the planet? We can recycle, we can compost. So many natural opportunities to build care into a curriculum that is rich and diverse. And just like I started at the beginning, I talked about Julia as a cat, looking for the themes of care in the children's play. It's so obvious when the child who's barely one is already pretending to take care of the baby doll. Care is a central theme to the child who is rapidly changing in this super amazing growth spurt. And even the big kid who is jumping and pretending to be a superhero and becoming powerful as the 4, 5, 6-year-old, even when we look at their play, we see the themes of safety, love, belonging, care. Thank you so much. That was a quick 45 minutes, and I'd love to take any questions if there are any.
Carol, it looks like you must have answered everything in your talk.
Great.
Thank you so much for such an informative and thought-provoking session. It was really interesting and appreciated all of your really specific examples. and look forward to seeing more from your book.
Great.
I did not hear from my door prize winner, Marcy Parker. If you're out there, let me know. You're the runner-up. And attendees, please make sure to complete the post-conference survey. Survey is required for those of you that are attending as a staff in-service day. And thank you so much for attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference.